Hello and welcome to the Mind Lab. Today we are going to be looking at memory. Your memory is the store for mental representation of events, images, ideas and information after the original information is no longer present. This is Richard Schifrin, who helped come up with the Atkinson-Schifrin model of memory in the 1960s. Remember that name because we will be testing you on that later. Let's first start with how we remember memories. Memories are generally accessed through three different ways: recall, recognition, and relearning. Let's start with recall, the way you bring back up stored information. Normally, this is something that is in long-term storage and requires a higher depth of processing. For example, if we show you this, you are probably familiar with what you are looking at, but it is not recognizable straight away. It's somewhere in your long-term memory storage, where it is there waiting for you to pull it out. Even though you knew that it was a molecule that you were looking at, there was still the effort to recall it from your memory. Moving on to recognition, a measure of memory in which the person need only identify items previously learned. For example, taking a multiple choice test requires you to identify material that you have learned and not necessarily recall information learned previously. And finally, relearning, refreshing or restoring old information. You get to relearn things you somewhat forgot in the past, quicker than when you were first learning them. Like now you are relearning a part of psychology and see how easy it's coming back to you. So that's how we remember memories. But how do we create them? We record things we see, hear and do as an immediate sensory memory. So, do you remember the name of the man in the picture at the start? If you remember the name Richard Schifrin, that's probably because you managed to get it into your short-term memory where you encoded it through rehearsal. It's the same way you remember numbers. If someone asks you to remember a number, you repeat them until you think you can remember them. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. There we go. Memory through rehearsal. This information really only stays in your short-term memory for less than 30 seconds, unless you are rehearsing it. And sadly, as amazing as our brains are, we can really only hold between 4 to 7 bits of information at a time. At this point, the memory either decays or is encoded into your long-term memory. Your long-term memory is a huge, durable hard drive, which holds pretty much everything you can remember, your skills, experiences, and knowledge. Now, since the days of Atkinson-Schifrin, other psychologists have realized that the definition of short-term memory didn't really show what all the processes were to transfer into your long-term memory. This is where the definition of the working memory comes in. The working memory is a conscious active processing of incoming auditory and visual spatial information, and of information retrieved from long-term memory. We think of it involving both explicit and implicit processes. When we make the conscious or active decision to store information, that's an explicit process. We use this process of working memory when we study. This is how we capture facts and knowledge that we think we will need. When I asked you to remember Schifrin's name, you concentrated on it and filed the name away. We are not conscious of every tiny thing we take in, but our working memory can take in information that we are not consciously aware of to our long-term storage. This is implicit memory. A good example of this is classically conditioned associations. Like if you're sat in the doctor's office waiting for your injections, you may feel nervous and panicky because you remember your last set of injections. You don't need to pull up the memory to know that you don't particularly enjoy being a pincushion. So your implicit processes cover that stuff automatically. It's hard to turn off this memory reaction, but it's a good way to protect yourself. Like how we know not to touch something hot because after the first time we try to, the memory was created. Now we are heading over to our expert to see how this information can be applied to the exam questions.
Hello. We are quickly going to look at possible questions you could encounter during your exam. For example, describe and evaluate one study in which the multi-store explanation of memory was investigated. Now, most people will choose Peterson and Murdoch's studies. However, don't make the mistake of talking about multiple or different studies. This will prevent you from getting top marks even if your answer is good enough. Avoid generic evaluations, which can be applied to virtually any study at all. Being precise is key. Remember this when it comes to your exam. See you next time.
We are still talking about long-term memory. We have two different kinds. The first is procedural memory. This refers to how we remember to do things like read, ride bikes, talk. It's a lot of effort to learn at first, but once it's learned and in your procedural memory, you can do it without thinking about it. Long-term memory can also be episodic, linked to specific parts of your life. Remember that time in year 7 when that giant snowball fight broke out? To keep a healthy memory, there are a few good ways to remember information. For example, mnemonics like Richard of York gave battle in vain will help you to remember the colours in the rainbow. Chunking is another way to learn and remember things and can happen automatically. You create chunks or patterns to remember things like phone numbers. So in today's Mind Lab, we have learned about how memories have formed and how you can decode them in order to remember them. That's it for this episode. Don't forget that over on our website, there is a quiz to test your knowledge. Next week, we'll be looking at the explanations for forgetting. Please subscribe and check out our social media. We've been the Mind Lab. Thanks for watching.